everyone, and welcome again back to Allen Real Estate here at Century 21 Everest Realty Group. In the first part of this series, we talked about what closing costs are and the difference between what constitutes buyer closing costs and seller closing costs. And in this segment, I want to discuss how the closing costs play into the price of a home and the negotiations between a buyer and a seller, both from the seller standpoint and from the buyer standpoint. In this video, I'm going to focus on the buyer's perspective, and in the next video, which I believe will be the final and third part of our series, we'll cover the seller's perspective. Let's start first with how we deal with closing costs from a buyer's standpoint. As a buyer, you'll remember that we have closing costs that are basically made up of the costs of borrowing the money for the purchase of your home, as well as some other due diligence and administrative costs. Things like financing charges such as lender fees, interest points, appraisal fees, etc. Homeowners insurance premiums, inspection fees, title search and recording fees, and taxes. You need to look at these expenses as expenses that you will need to pay above and beyond the price of the home you purchase. Now, the amount of these buyer closing costs range typically between 2 and 4% of the purchase price of the home, depending on your individual circumstances. We often figure on about 3%. So a $200,000 home will cost you about $6,000 additional in closing costs to purchase, making your total purchase expense about $206,000. Now, a majority of buyers in today's market don't have an extra 3% sitting in their bank account. If you do, great. If they do have extra cash, they may already be using it towards a down payment, which may be typically anywhere between 3.5% to 20%. Or if you qualify for what lenders call a zero down loan, you may not have a down payment or the extra 3% in closing costs. So the issue becomes, how do I as a buyer pay for those closing costs if I don't have any extra cash? And there are a couple of ways to do this. The first way is if the specific loan program that you're using allows it, you can gift it from someone else. Maybe your parents or friends can gift you the money. Just be aware that some loan guidelines have very specific requirements on where this money can come from and how it must be accounted for. So make sure you discuss this with your lender up front before you have someone gift you some money for closing costs or down payment. The second more common way, which we'll talk more about here, is to have the closing costs included in the loan amount that you're borrowing. This also depends on if you can qualify for a loan program that allows this. Some loan programs will allow you to borrow up to an additional 6% towards closing costs and down payment. This method of including the closing costs in your loan is also the same thing as what you hear when you hear it said the seller will pay your closing costs. That means including it into the loan. Now, this may sound like two different things, and you may ask, if I'm borrowing money from the lender, why is the seller paying closing costs? And I'll explain. Let's say that you negotiate a contract with a seller to buy a house for $200,000, but you still need another $6,000 in closing costs. The loan program you qualify for allows you to add this amount to the loan. However, the purchase contract and the loan must be equal. You can't have a contract for $200,000 and have the lender give you a loan for $206,000. They must be the same. So what we do is we would say to the seller, I'll give you $206,000 for your home, and you credit back to me $6,000 towards my closing costs. That way, the lender can pay the seller $206,000 for the home, and the seller then returns $6,000 as a credit towards the buyer's closing costs. That's how the closing costs get financed into the loan. The seller pays them out of the proceeds of the sale. Now, this brings us to the second part of the issue, which is negotiating the price and getting the seller to include those closing costs as a credit to you. And it can be a big sticking point between buyers and sellers and trying to understand what's fair and what's not. So let's talk about it from the buyer's standpoint. Let's say the home you want to purchase, and let's swing over here to the whiteboard, and I'll try and put some numbers here on the board for you. So let's say that the home that you want to purchase is worth $200 or is listed at $200,000, and you need an additional $6,000 in closing costs from the seller. So, but let's say you're going to need an additional $6,000 here, but you don't want to pay $206,000 for your home. You feel that $200,000 is the max that you'll pay. Well, how are we going to get, if we can't get the seller to pay this, how are we going to get that to happen? We may be able to go to the seller and say, well, I don't want to pay $206,000 for the home. I do need $6,000 in closing costs from you because I don't have it myself. So will you take a purchase price of $200,000 in closing costs instead, and offer $200,000 and give me $6,000 back in closing costs? Well, essentially that's subtracting that from their net profit, so they're coming up with $194,000 in closing or in net profit from you, and so obviously that could be a challenge. Some sellers will accept that. They'll include that $200,000 or that $6,000, those closing costs, in the price. Others may say, no, if you want me to do this, I have to have $206,000 from you in order to make that work, so that I can come out at a net of $200,000. And we'll talk more about this, why this may not work with certain sellers is it just depends on the current market and the values in each individual situation. Basically what you have to remember is you're asking them for a discount, and depending on the situation, the seller may or may not be able to give you that discount. There's never a handout, so there has to be some sort of compensating value that makes it worth it for the seller to give you the discount you're asking for. And that may come in the form of tangible or intangible terms, like more earnest money, quicker closing times, less concessions on other things like repairs, lots of different things. And this is where an experienced and competent realtor can be a big benefit to you. They can help you find other terms that you can offer besides just more money in order to help you get a good offer accepted on your purchase. Now, especially if you're in a market where you're competing against other buyers for the same home. Now let's just close up talking about how things work right now in today's market, which is a seller's market, and many buyers are competing for the short supply of homes. Because the demand is high, lots of buyers, and the supply is low, less houses to buy, this is pushing the prices of homes steadily up, meaning it is less likely in this market that you're going to be able to convince a seller to sell their home to you at a discount. More than likely you'll be paying at or above list price for the home. Now don't freak out on me. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Again, a good agent can help you understand whether you're overpaying for a home or not, even if you are paying above asking price. But the fact is that right now there are as many as a dozen buyers for every seller in some places. And if you need the seller to pay an extra 3% in closing costs, meaning you need them to give you the 3% discount, then you need to position yourself with value in other ways so that you can compete against other buyers out there who do not have who do have an extra 3% in the bank and are willing to pay their own closing costs. For example, maybe you can only qualify for a total loan amount of $200,000. Even if the seller is willing to pay your costs and you're willing to pay on a loan up to $206,000, the lender can't approve you for any more than $200,000 based on your finances. Or maybe you do qualify for more and the seller is willing to pay your costs at $206,000, but the appraisal price of the home comes in and says it's only valued at $200,000. In this latter case, the seller is going to choose a buyer that's willing to pay $200,000 and has $6,000 in cash of their own to pay their own closing costs. That way, the seller still nets $200,000 instead of $194,000, which they would get even if you offered them $200,000 as well, but you needed $6,000 in closing costs. Again, without an experienced professional guidance, it may be difficult and even discouraging to get an offer accepted on a home in this market. What I'm saying is, if you need seller paid closing costs, you have an additional challenge to overcome. in this current market in 2017. But I don't want you to let that fear stop you from getting into the market to buy a home and chase your dreams. I've been successful in educating and helping buyers in this market position themselves to be successful in purchasing. An agent who understands the local market, understands your goals and circumstances, and is skilled in negotiating will be able to help you succeed. They'll be able to help you identify the factors that you can use and how to best, especially if you need closing costs, and how those work in negotiating those into the price of the home and helping you win the bidding war that often happens out there. I hope this information was helpful to you. There are a lot of different variables and circumstances that we could cover depending on your unique situation. So if you have questions, please feel free to give me a call or send me a message, and I'll be glad to help. Have a great day.